Well, good morning. Thank you very much for having us. Thanks especially to Matt Stanley and the team at Think Digital Partners for inviting us to speak. This morning, you're going to hear a little bit from me and then mostly from Tim, who is the brains behind what we're going to cover this morning. Yes, just in case you don't know what we look like when you want to see us around, and we're here all day today. So a little bit about who we are. Condatis, maybe not a household name like our colleagues at Microsoft, but we are unashamedly identity aficionados. That's what we live, eat and breathe. We're based up in the, I can say today, sunny city of Edinburgh. Delighted to be down here in London today. And we've been working in digital identity for over 10 years now. We have a team of about 50 digital identity experts. And what we really focus on is identity access management. What we, I guess, look to ourselves as experts is implementing those solutions with our Microsoft Gold partner, both on moving people from on-prem to federated, and then more recently, we've been doing some of the trials on decentralized or self-sovereign identity. So our client base, well, it's delightful to see so many of them in the room today. We have an extensive client base across UK central government, including DWP and Defra. We've been working very closely with one of our partner companies, Sitekit, on the work with NHS, on helping them on a digital staff passport, as well as slightly further afield. You may have seen some of the use cases on decentralized identity as far and wide as Australia, as well as in the UK. I think what we see, and Alana and Brandon, I think, put it really clearly, is how sticky identity is, how much of an enabler it is. And for us, when we engage with clients to look to implement a bespoke solution with them, it's about an identity journey. So we're not looking for a fixed solution often. Clients come to us with, occasionally, a fixed set of objectives and acceptance criteria, but that's not often the case. So a number of clients come along and they're still looking at on-prem solutions, and we're very keen to help them and enable them to move on to something like Azure, one of the largest cloud solution providers provided by Microsoft, and they can move on in that journey to a federated system. And what we're seeing now is not necessarily a sequential movement, but a journey which may, in time, have people bringing their own identity with them, and looking to, I guess, re-enable individuals to have control of their data through decentralized identity. And we're very excited to have some of the use cases which we've implemented on that. I guess particularly on our work with Defra, Tim's going to go through the details of what the sort of the problem statement has been and the opportunities and how large Defra is as a government department. We've been working with Defra now for over 4 years. We were initially introduced to them by Microsoft, and at the time, Defra were considering a number of different digital identity providers. They had already started to consume Azure Cloud Services. Obviously, Microsoft offer a number of other everyday software platforms, including Office 365. And for them, the ability to scale and implement an overall Microsoft solution was a key factor for them to decide to use Azure Active Directory B2C. And that's something which we've been working on. We did the first implementation of B2C nearly 10 years ago. Another key factor for Defra, as we understood it, was their ability to engage with a subject matter expert, of which I've already said we're unashamedly one of those. We live, eat and breathe digital identity. And it's to do with that journey. When you look at 2018, there's a different political landscape, a different environmental landscape, a different societal landscape. I certainly didn't expect there to be a global pandemic or some of the challenges we've had around Brexit. But as a result, they've made that digital identity journey one which has, in time, shifted somewhat, and we've had to flow with that. We've been delighted, though, to collaborate very closely with Defra through that time. With B2C, you're able to look at custom policies, system configuration, and overall interoperability with the rest of their systems, which they use on a day-to-day basis. we've been working with them, I guess, quite closely through that design and development period. And I'm going to hand over to Tim, who's going to talk a little bit more about that scale of the challenge and how we've gone about implementing it. Tim.
Great. Well, thank you, Chris, and good morning, everyone. Yeah, as Chris said, what we're trying to do this morning is walk through some of our kind of journey we've been on within Defra, driven out of the need to digitise a lot of our services. And I think what we've seen as part of that journey is the need to be able to start looking at how we can provide some of the capabilities that are needed with transformation more centrally. What we've found is that when we've looked at each of the individual programs, large or small, we've got a massive amount of duplication. And so what we tried to do is look at, right, actually, where can we start to build out some common platform services that are reusable across each of the individual digital capabilities? And for us, identity is a key one of that. And actually, we built up a capability here. We've got our Defra customer, which is a kind of a centralized store of core customer information where customers, when they're registering with us, we can share and they can store and we can reuse across those different digital services. We've got the digital identity, which is our authorization, authentication, and tightly coupled with what we're doing with customer, because actually what we need to do is relate that individual authentication to an account to be able to authorize them. And then we've got the integration and reporting services. But the key one, obviously, for us to look at is Defra Identity today. So a little bit of history. We started back in about 2016, 2017, looking at quite a large amount of transformation within Defra. And part of that actually was then focusing on what we're going to do around identity. We started out the project, started engaging, looking at the different options we had. And at this point, this is where we suddenly had the problems of Brexit. And we suddenly got diverted from those key transformation programs into focusing on what we had to do for the Brexit. And we had about 5 key services that we had to build, which were replacing key European services. And so we were redirected as a team. We started focusing on actually the identity element of that and started to look at some of the challenges we had around providing that for that program. Key thing is we did, and we managed to deliver a identity service which was able to have a single identity for people to log into any one of those 5 services. That got delivered, but the key thing now was starting to look at how we can maybe extend that across wider Defra. And we had to make some key decisions really as part of that. Defra, we worked with Brexit because actually we had things like the potential drop dead date of actually cliff edge services not being available. So some decisions we had to make which were really key to be able to drive that quite quickly and meet some timelines. So after the delivery, we worked and started working with Condatis. We started looking at actually what's our roadmap going to look like. You know, we've got the core service, which we've proven is working. But the key now was how can we extend it? What do we have to do to review it to make it actually more extensible and more available across Defra services? So if we look at some of our key problems we had, so 80% basically of our transactions within Defra are business related. You know, they're not related necessarily to individuals, citizens, but they're basically to the businesses. So what we had to really start looking at was, government gateway and verify, did the individual, but how can we start relating the businesses to those individuals and ensuring that whoever's logging into that service on behalf of that business actually has the right to transact on behalf of. So that was one of the issues. And we deal with manufacturing companies, wholesalers, farmers, smallholders. So, very large organisations to very small organisations, with 1 or 2 people in. Then there was the complexity of the relationship. So as I said to you, what we have is organisations who have employees who have to log in and transact on behalf of that organisation. So we need to understand the individual once they've authenticated that they have a right to transact on behalf of that organisation. We also have the concept of agents working on behalf of. So how do we ensure that if I'm a small trader or farmer and I've got a farming agent, how can I ensure that that agent, when they log into our Defra services, has the right to transact on behalf of us? And that's a really, really core part of what we're having to try and deal with. And the other issue is obviously that problem we had at the beginning, which is, we've got these siloed delivery teams and siloed programs who are all building their own capabilities. And so actually trying to move that away from a customer point of view, they've got, 3 or 4, we've heard about it before, it's common across the board. So how do we get a single identity that can actually be consumed across all of Defra with the relationships and complexity we have with the business? So those are some of our key problems we had, which we're trying to deal with. We did that. So we built it for the EU exit, and we dealt with some of those challenges. So we dealt with this idea of a single account. We dealt with the idea of being able to build the delegated authority, the relationships that allowed different organisations of different sizes to be able to log in. And you'll see this picture really was describing that transition. On the left-hand side, that single person, individual, who has these multiple accounts, each one for every service. From a user experience point of view, really poor, but really complex as well as trying to join up. And what we did with the EU exit was transition to this new model, which is an individual has a single account with us and can then enroll into and log into multiple different services. And the point there was our ability to be able to offer that customer the ability to be able to manage some of their own information. So a single account management page where they could log into and they can start managing their own details, and they can also enroll into those different services and change permissions. So if I'm rolling into an exporter service, I can log in, I can manage who of my team can log into that service and what roles they have. And so that got delivered, and what we then see is how do we then transition that piece into a bit more of a roadmap. So as we see, the Europe and Trade, which was our Brexit service, we've got 4 services up and running, have been for a couple of years now. But we're onboarding another 3 major programs, another 30 new digital potential services. And so it was about how we then scale out what we've already bought or built, proven the concept of the idea of how you do delegated authority, how you manage business relationships. And so the work we started doing with Condatis was really looking at then the scaling out of that capability. But it's also what's important for us is that individual in the middle of that picture there has a relationship with any one of those services. So an example, a farmer would log into the European Trade. He would potentially do an export or an import notification to be able to move livestock around. But that same farmer's logging into our environmental regulatory services to be able to manage permits and licenses around waste and water abstraction. And again, they're going into future farming. So the idea of having this single account, which we proved out in the European Trade, was now going to be extended wider across the services. So this new service, what's important about it is the capabilities it offers us, the framework that was in place. So single sign-in, really important. The idea of having single ID is one thing, but being able to move between those different services, as we talked about, was really important because they do transact across those different services we deployed. Multi-region, really important for us because actually some of the services we deliver are really key. We have fishermen who are out in the seas, and when they come in, they have to log in, they have to notify us of their catch certificates of what's been done, ready for them to export. Now, if we have any issues, downtime, that has quite a major impact on not just them and their livelihood, but potentially the exports we're going to bring in. So the ability to have that multi-region deployment and tier 1 service is something that we've been doing and working with Condatis on. Simpler integration using native B2C. We've moved to more standardized services with that, but it does mean actually gives us an awful lot of opportunity to build on top of that core identity service. And scalability, the volumes, we started small with a number of services in the EU exit, now Europe and Trade. but we're about to bring online another 30 of those services. So what we had to do was make sure the capability was scalable for us to be able to deal with that. So key elements for us. So future opportunities, really, as I said before, the framework is important for us, getting the groundwork done properly so we can start then building on top of that. We work, and we're starting to work now with the Four Nations. So we're looking with the framework we put in with Condatis and our team is about how do we start then using that framework to extend out with federation. So, if I've got people, customers within the Welsh or Scottish systems who actually want to log into some of the wider Four Nations services, looking at how we federate with that to make that journey easier for them to reuse their current ID. And then looking at obviously how we do maybe potentially distributed identity. It is a potential opportunity. We can look at it. We see it as maybe an opportunity to look at a hybrid approach. We put it on top of and sit side by side with our centralised identity. So we're starting to look at how we can explore and adding in some of those over the next few years. Because the journey we're on is, at the start of it. And I think it's what's really important for us is now we've built out those capabilities, is how we can then foster them. The important thing is we don't know what's happening with, obviously, GDS are working on what the new single identity. So the framework we have in place allows us to federate, to be able to authenticate with GDS as the IDP. We do that today with SCP. So actually, when we go through our authentication journey, we orchestrate it in B2C. We redirect to SCP for authentication. It comes back to us, and B2C orchestrates a journey back in for authorization within our customer environment. So our ability to add in additional identity providers as part of that federated network is quite exciting for us. It gives us a lot of opportunity, especially if we start migrating legacy services off their current kind of siloed capabilities into a more centralized piece for us. So that's everything. Any questions, or over to you, Griff, back to you.
Okay, I think from a time-wise point of view, that's pretty much us done. But I think thank you very much, Tim, for agreeing to spend a bit of time with questions.
And one question for me was, so you're Defra doing this. What did you learn from other departments, or did you discuss with other departments in terms of looking at identity? You talked to DWP, or what was the sort of process for discussion when it came to talking about?
So we went through a number of conversations around the use the microphone. Yes. Let me come back here. Sorry. Yeah, so we have been talking. So we've been talking to certainly HMRC. We've been working with them anyway with SCP, GDS team as well around that. We're very particular in the sense of our business-driven identities. It's about, once we know who the individual is, how do we create that relationship between the individuals and the organisation to ensure, whether you're an agent working on behalf of, whether you're an employee of an organisation. What's really important is for us to know that individual who's logging on has the right to transact on behalf of that. So that challenge of how do we deal with business verification has been the challenge for us, not necessarily the individual identity and verification piece.
Any other questions? Can't see them. On that? Yeah.
I was interested, are you personalising your services then? Because I'm assuming Defra have tons but individuals interact with all of them. How do people know which services they should be using, and you don't bombard them with the sea of stuff? So targeting and niche, making it more niche, easier for them to interact.
Yeah, so each of the service is obviously follows standard GDS guidelines, and obviously within that it has the banner of what they are and who they are. Obviously behind the scenes, when someone goes onto gov.uk, presses the start button, it kind of redirects to our service for the authentication piece and the authorization. We go through, and once we do that, we provide the token with all the relevant information to pass back to that original service. So we're kind of a middle layer that just really behind the scenes just enables the services still to carry on working, but in a more kind of centralized way with that single identity and ID.
I have a couple of questions that have come in. Maybe you can sort of roll them in together. So what data is Defra using in verifying the link between individuals and businesses? And one more here. What is the future direction of Defra as regards some of the other topics we've heard from today, e.g. proliferation of different identity providers across government?
So the relationship, obviously verification of a business to an individual is very difficult. There's not anything out there. We have a number of ways of doing that. One is we have a relationship with a lot of these businesses already, so we can already start creating that relationship. We also have a number of offline processes that enable us to, when a new organisation is being created by an individual, that can go offline. There's a number of checks get done behind the scenes, and that then gets verified and that account created. We then have we push the relationship ownership back to the business themselves. We do not want to be the owners and managing multiple accounts. So the idea is that we provide an ability for an administrator of their service or the organisation to be able to manage who joins it, who doesn't, what access they have and what rights they have. So we kind of delegate the authority out. The key one is that initial creation of the organisation and the relationship with the organisation. The other question was around the just.
So one was about the verifying the link between individual businesses, and the future direction of Defra as regards some of the topics around proliferation of different identity providers.
Yeah. So, we see ourselves aligning in with what's happening in central government. We don't see any change in that. I think what we're trying to do is fill that gap with how do we manage businesses. So the idea, the framework we have in place allows us to federate and use GDS, SCP, a bespoke credential store, whatever we want to do, whatever we think is appropriate. So we're fully aligned with that. And I think what's important is we're part of having those conversations, and I know others are as well. When they're ready, we're ready to start have that relationship and start building up and integrating with them. What we're really interested in is the verification piece. I know, you talked about it this morning. We've been talking to HMRC about that, and we're really keen to start using the GDS service to be able to do that, because we haven't done is created our own credential store. What we've done is created an orchestration engine that allows us to be able to reach out to wherever we need to reach out to be able to do the authentication, and then breach internally about how do we authorize them. And it's the authentication and authorization, the two elements you can split quite easily and manage that separately. So, and that's where the B2C and the framework allows us to join that piece together and orchestrate it.
Right. Thanks very much. Tim, Skaptason from Defra and Chris Tate from Condatis. Thanks very much indeed.